All right. My name is Judy Tweet. I run programs and communications for the Pacific Marine Energy Center. And if you're not familiar with PMAC, we are a research consortium on a mission to responsibly advance marine energy. We work across 3 different universities: University of Washington, University of Alaska Fairbanks, and Oregon State University. And we run seminars every quarter during the academic school year. This is our final seminar for the fall of 2025, and we're so happy to be hearing from Grace Chang today. For many of you, she doesn't need an introduction, but I know not everyone knows her. So Grace has more than 25 years of experience in the fields of limnology and oceanography. She's managed programs involving field operations, data processing and analysis, and numerical modeling for environmental characterization, observational monitoring, scientific research, and tech development in support of marine renewable energy, in hydrodynamics, and sediment transport, and oceanographic research programs. She is recognized for her continued advancement of analytical methods in hydrodynamics and particle characterization through optics and acoustics, as well as for environmental research and monitoring. Dr. Chang has more than 40 peer-reviewed publications and is frequently invited to review materials for professional journals and national funding agencies. So happy to have her today. Grace, welcome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Let me get sharing here. Okay, I'm assuming that worked as it did when we practiced.
We see it.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, PMAC, so much for inviting me to present at your seminar series. As always, it's a great pleasure to be here with the PMAC community. So I asked ChatGPT to come up with a catchy title that captures my research experiences and interests, and it came up with Turbines, Tides, and Toxic Tidbits. I added a day in the life of an oceanographer. So how did it arrive at that title? Well, let's start with a little bit about Integral Consulting, where I am the Director of Research and Development. At Integral, we work on projects involving tides, turbines, and toxic tidbits. Integral has 8 technical practices encompassing environmental economics, permitting, and I'm going to make sure I don't forget one here, toxicology and health, engineering, hydrogeochemistry, data management, sediment and water, and of course, marine science. We work together to tackle a broad range of projects, including legacy contaminated sites, like most environmental consulting firms. But we also have expertise in fields such as product stewardship, industrial hygiene, stormwater management, and of course, marine renewable energy. At Integral, we pride ourselves on delivering science, engineering, and technology-driven solutions for complex challenges. What's especially important in this day and age is that despite the environmental work we do, including a lot of cleanup, we believe that people can be good stewards to the earth. And we also stand by our values. I thought it'd be worth mentioning that our shareholders founded the Integral Charitable Foundation, or ICF, in 2021. We are a nonprofit 501c3 whose mission is to expand access to science and engineering knowledge, address climate change and its impacts, and improve environmental and social conditions in our communities and beyond. The ICF has 3 pillars of giving. We have a pro bono program where Integral employees provide technical expertise to a nonprofit partner organization. So twice a year, we solicit proposals from Integral employees, and we select projects that help make an impact on our local communities. We've supported projects in which our oceanographers have contributed to at-sea marine education, including developing curricula, and we've even built an ROV for educational use. It was debuted at a Girls in Ocean Science conference where the ROV was taken out to the Santa Barbara Channel Islands for use in looking at the biota. In our second pillar, we contribute scholarship funds to partner universities, including the University of Washington. We support education in environmental fields. We support an HBCU, or historically Black college or university, and this year we are adding support to a TCU, or tribal colleges and universities. And lastly, we invest in our communities through direct charitable donations and volunteering. This year, Integral employees have cleaned up several beaches and parks, and we've even picked apples for food banks in the Denver area. So activities under ICF's umbrella make me smile. I am the board secretary for the ICF. These are well aligned with my career goals, and those goals were developed over the last several decades. So let's go back to last century. I studied geoenvironmental engineering and geology at the University of Minnesota Twin Cities campus. There, I was particularly interested in sediment transport. I helped set up experiments at the St. Anthony Falls Laboratory, which now does a lot of marine energy work, at the time did not. But there I looked at turbidity flows, formation of deltas, and other fun stuff. I was that undergrad who stood at the receiving end of a cement mixer while it sprayed wet sediment everywhere, as the real researchers and scientists stood behind windows. At some point, I wised up, realized I wanted to be the one behind the window. I also realized that sediment doesn't just move around in cold Midwestern rivers, it also moves around in the ocean, in areas like coastal California, where the climate is much nicer. So I moved to Santa Barbara. I earned a Master's of Science in Mechanical and Environmental Engineering and a PhD in Marine Science, concentrating on physical oceanography, specifically ocean optics. After graduating, I stayed at UCSB as a soft money researcher. I worked primarily on Office of Naval Research, or ONR projects, focused on the variability of underwater optical properties associated with physical processes. So unfortunately for me and several others, the ONR shut down its environmental optics program in the mid to late 2000s, or knots, I guess it should be called. And my research dollars dried up. These dollars were needed to pay not only for my own salary, but that of my husband, who was our lab's field guide. And at this point in my career, this is when I first realized how important it is to network and to maintain a healthy network. After writing 10 fairly cumbersome proposals in 1 year and having just one small one funded, one that wasn't enough to fund my own salary, much less me and my husband, I ran into an old grad school buddy of mine at the Ocean Sciences meeting. This was a meeting I'd been going to every other year, had never seen him there before. I happened to be keeping tabs on him and was emailing him every year on his birthday, so he remembered me. He worked as an environmental consultant and just happened to be looking to hire 2 people. One person with sediment transport data analysis expertise, and the second, a field person. So began my career and my husband's career in environmental consulting. We were started out at Sea Engineering. Our primary projects were performing remedial investigations at Superfund sites. As consultants, however, we do whatever's interesting and cool, and we started supporting Sandia National Laboratories on marine energy projects. We were an early evaluator of SNL Swan and set up and ran this model at the Wave Energy Test Site in Hawaii, in addition to other sites. We were looking specifically at potential effects of wave energy converters on local wave environments. Also, as an academic at heart, which I still am, we did continue to pursue grant opportunities in oceanography, and we were successful in winning an ARPA-E award to develop a wave measurement buoy for wave energy converter applications. This buoy was eventually commercialized as the spotter wave buoy, offered by SOFAR, which many of you may have heard of and hopefully have used. In the middle of that ARPA-E project, our California-based Sea Engineering group moved over to Integral Consulting. So I've now been at Integral for over 11 years, and over this time, I have diversified my research interests. And I'll try to cover a range of these interests in a series of smaller lightning talks that cover turbines, tides, and toxic tidbits. So I'll start with toxic tidbits. This presentation, Riders on the Stormwater, characterizing PCBs discharged in Pearl Harbor, was presented at the 12th International Conference on the Remediation and Management of Contaminated Sediments. That is a conference that was presented in January of this year. We present results from a project that was supported by the Environmental Security Technology Certification Program, or ESTCP. This is the Technology Transition R&D program for the Department of Defense, or DoD. So our problem statement is shown here. This is a direct quote from the Pearl Harbor Naval Complex Superfund Site Record of Decision, or ROD. And on the screen, as you can read, it states, the contaminant concentration profile for sediment near an outfall of Dry Dock 4 indicates that concentrations are stable or increase toward the sediment surface, indicating potential continuing input of contaminants localized to the area immediately off the outfall. So I'm showing here data collected during the remedial investigation in this area of the Pearl Harbor Superfund site. It shows hotspots of contaminants in red. These are primarily PCBs, and this is within 1 foot of the surface of the sediment. This area is called Decision Unit N2, or DUN2. It's located along the eastern bank of the main stem to Pearl Harbor. The continuing input of contaminants to this area is of particular concern because the Navy had recently spent quite a bit of money and time remediating the sediment under Oscar I Pier. So the hotspots that are located at the base of Oscar I Pier outfall may be recontaminating what has already been removed and capped. So we were challenged to determine whether stormwater from Oscar I Pier outfall is contributing ongoing PCBs to the area, and if yes, to characterize this stormwater plume of PCBs. So to address this challenge, we employed our patented optics technology, where optics stands for Optically Based In Situ Characterization System. Optics was developed to increase the resolution at which we can obtain chemical contaminant concentration beyond the intermittency of traditional discrete water sample collection, where you just basically dip a bucket, send it off to the lab, wait for a while for that sample to be analyzed. So optics involves the collection of 2 different data sets, one being that intermittent discrete water sample data analyzed in the laboratory, and the other being high resolution in situ water quality and optical parameters, also physical processes that can be resolved with instrumentation. In this example, we're showing high resolution water temperature and then optical properties that serve as proxies for particle characteristics such as concentration, size, and composition. Now, the idea or principle behind optics is that chemical contaminants may vary with physical processes in a system, and there are sensors that measure these processes. And contaminants tend to associate with sticky particles that have particular characteristics that can be measured using optical sensors. So therefore, we can integrate these 2 data sets using a multi-parameter statistical regression model with the high resolution in situ data representing predictor variables and the discrete surface water sample chemical concentration data as the response variable. So our result is chemical concentrations at high resolution. Here we're showing an example with high temporal resolution data. These are every 15 minutes. This method has also been applied to high spatial resolution data. For example, what we did at Pearl Harbor. So to address the issue of PCB delivery to Pearl Harbor via stormwater outfalls, we performed mobile vessel-based optics sampling throughout Decision Unit N2 during base flow and storm flow conditions. So we towed this profiling instrumentation package in a spoke pattern, following these colored transect lines. Oscar I Pier outfall was the hub. So as we transited in a vessel along these lines, this package was raised and lowered throughout the water column. So in this manner, we were able to collect high horizontal and vertical resolution in situ data throughout decision unit N2. We perform monitoring during baseline conditions, so no rain, and while the outfall was actively discharging stormwater. These instruments measured water quality and optical parameters that served as the predictor variables for our statistical model. Our response variables for the optics model were collected while we were transecting. So we collected discrete surface water samples at varying distances from the outfall. These ranged from within 5 meters, so just at the base of the outfall, to up to about 300-meter distance, and that's this kind of center channel point right here. These samples were collected at 1 to 2 meters above the sediment bed. And the water depth, just for context, at the base of the outfall is about 5 meters, increased to about 14 meters here at 300 meters from the outfall. So this figure shows some results from our discrete surface water samples. So these are our response variables. These samples that I'm showing here collected within 5 meters of the base of the outfall at about 1 meter above the sediment bed. This top figure is local precipitation. These are just showing one of our storm flow days, February 17th of 2023. This middle figure shows a photograph of the outfall during every water sample we collected. Again, at 1 meter above the sediment bed at the base of the outfall. Bottom panels show total PCB concentration. And the dashed line here is the average concentration that we measured during non-storm conditions. So this was in November, it hadn't rained in weeks. At this point, you're probably thinking, gosh, she's not a very good consultant, or she's absolutely crazy. The title of the slide says, Oscar 1 pure outfall is a source of PCBs. But we're showing PCB concentrations that really just bump along baseline concentration. Well, I am hiding something from you. We did collect 2 stormwater samples directly below the outfall. So this is before the water entered Pearl Harbor. We motored right up to the outfall, hung over the side of the boat, put the mouth of the bottle like right under that stormwater flow. And the total PCB concentrations of these 2 samples were over 2 orders of magnitude higher than the results obtained at the base of the outfall at 1 meter above the sediment bed. So why is this? It's kind of strange. Before we take a look at our spatially resolved optics model results, I want to show you something else that's interesting about these water samples. So what we're showing here is that the PCB fingerprints of those 2 outfall discharge samples were unique. These discharge waters are characterized by heavier congeners. PCBs can be analyzed with aerochlors and congeners. There's 208 total congeners. It has to do with the molecular structure of this chemical contaminant. But you can see that discharge water, so this is closest to the outfall, or I'm sorry, these were the 2 samples directly out of the outfall. These have heavier congeners that are also shown in the other samples that were collected at the varying distances. But what we see in the discharge water is an absence of lighter congeners. Lighter congeners are found elsewhere throughout decision unit N2. They have peaks at about PCB 11, between PCB 44 and 54, and about PCB 65. Again, these are absent. We don't see any of these data in the discharge water samples. Now, researchers have attributed lighter congeners to the dissolved phase or filtered phase of this chemical contaminant, and heavier concentrations of congeners to the particulate phase, which means that Oscar 1 pure outfall is likely discharging particulate-bound PCBs to Pearl Harbor. Also, because of this patterning, it could mean that there's more than one source of PCBs to the site, or that there's partitioning processes away from the outfall. In other words, away from the outfall, the particulate-bound PCBs are dissociating and becoming dissolved. So let's go back, look at those optics data. This is a 3D plot showing total PCB concentrations throughout decision unit N2. Again, these are modeled from our optics model. To orient you, the outfall is in the back of your screen. Dry dock is extending towards the left, which is toward the north. Oscar 1 Pier is off to your right, is towards the south. Closest to you, if you can imagine it coming out of the screen, is the center of the channel. That's 300 meters from the outfall, kind of center channel in that main stem of Pearl Harbor. You can see total PCBs are highly variable, and here total just means the sum of all congeners. It's highly variable throughout decision unit N2. You can see some elevated concentrations near the sediment bed, but it's otherwise kind of hard to make out any trends. So if we plot instead, or define instead, some elevated PCBs, now these we just defined as PCB concentrations in exceedance of the 1/3 quantile. We show this on the right. Now we start to see some patterns, like elevated PCBs right under the outfall, and then at certain depths away from the outfall. Now these patterns become clearer if we look at the data from a different perspective. So let's flatten this 3D plot out and look at it from above. So that's the figure on the left here. This is not a heat map of concentration. So rather what we're showing here is PCB exceedance as a function of water depth. So data in red are locations where we observe elevated PCBs at 1 meter below the surface. Data in orange are locations where we observe elevated PCBs at 4 meters below the surface. And then so on with the spectrum and optical oceanographer. So in the spectral order, we end with data in the blue, which represents elevated PCBs at 12 meters below the sea surface. So what this shows is that PCBs, these are particulate bound PCBs again, are discharged from Oscar 1 Pier outfall. They remain in suspension, and then they disperse slowly throughout decision unit N2 before they settle to the bottom. The figure on the right shows this in a different way. What we're showing here is the maximum distance from the outfall where we observe elevated PCBs as a function of water depth. So again, we show high concentrations of PCBs stay within 1 meter of the surface at up to about 20 meters from the outfall. They settle to mid-water column, or about 6-meter water depth, about 250 meters away. And at 12-meter depth, or close to the bottom, elevated PCBs are observed at over 300 meters from the outfall. So, in summary, using optics technology, we show that Oscar 1 Pier outfall is a source of particulate bound during storm flow. These particle-bound PCBs remain in suspension, and they are ejected away from the outfall by tidal currents, or they settle elsewhere in decision unit. Like a dog without a bone, an actor out alone, riders on the storm. And I have to credit Amanda Miller from Integral for helping me create this video. All right. From toxic tidbits, let's move on to tides. In 2023, the state of California put forward Senate Bill 605, or SB 605, which by law required the California Energy Commission, or CEC, to evaluate the feasibility, costs, and benefits of wave and tidal energy in California. So we were lucky enough to work with the CEC's prime contractor, and Aspen Environmental, to support the writing of the Phase 1 and Phase 2 consultant reports for SB 605. We also participated in a couple of public workshops to present some of the material that I'm showing here. This was an excellent opportunity for us. We were able to contribute to marine renewable energy advancement for the state of California. It was a short talk, but there's a lot going on. I just didn't want to overwhelm. So this is truly a lightning talk. So our scope for Phase 1 report was pretty much to educate legislators and the public on marine energy. So we provided what you all would consider some pretty basic information. This was pretty eye-opening for a lot of the folks we talked with, though, particularly the legislators. We answered questions like, what is wave energy? What do devices even look like? What are the current challenges of this industry? And this is one of the slides that we pulled directly from our Phase 1 report and the workshop presentations. So again, pretty basic for you all, but very eye-opening for most other folks. Similar to this, we answered questions such as what is tidal energy and how are tidal energy devices deployed? How big are they? Where have they been piloted? Where have they been tested? Where have they been operating? We also provided some information on the potential for marine energy applications in California. Because commercial scale arrays are not yet realized really anywhere, we focused primarily on defining and describing powering the blue economy applications like ports and harbors, and pretty exciting this year, in alignment with SB 605 and powering the blue economy. Eco Wave Power launched an onshore wave energy installation at the Port of Los Angeles. It was just launched, I think it's September of this year. It will operate for the next 2 years to demonstrate the technology and collect some really valuable data for the developer as well as the Port of Los Angeles and for the state of California in general. For phase 2, which was sea space considerations, we performed a GIS-based analysis that combined wave and tidal energy resource characterization with spatial constraints along the coast of California. So we sourced wave and tidal resource data from the National Renewable Energy Lab. Sorry, they just rebranded, didn't they? From what is now the National Laboratory of the Rockies. So the former NREL's Marine Energy Atlas provided us with our wave and tidal resource data. The images we show here are wave power on the left. We go out to about the 200-meter isobath. But this has varying spatial resolution, order of hundreds of meters. Tidal power densities on the right. It has a uniform spatial resolution of about 300 meters. If you notice, there are 2 different units of measure here. We have kilowatts per meter for wave power and watts per square meter for tidal power. So these images show that the level of energy available from waves and tides is very different in the state. The amount of wave power that could feasibly be extracted off the coast of California is approximately 2 orders of magnitude or 100 times the amount of power available from tidal resources. And you'll hear me say we, I do live in Santa Barbara still, if I hadn't mentioned that. All right, so we sorted our wave and tidal resource data into bins, just simple low, medium, up to high power. And we highlighted then areas with the highest potential along our state. We then performed a spatial constraint analysis to identify the spatial intersections of energy resources with other marine uses. So we performed this analysis by splitting coastal California into 3 different regions. Northern from the Oregon border to north of the Bay Area, central from north of the Bay Area to Point Conception, and then Southern California from Point Conception down to the Mexican border. We considered constraints such as existing infrastructure, this is like pipelines, transportation corridors, etc. We looked at marine protected areas, defense sites, these are active defense sites, and then areas with known unexploded ordnances. And then we considered other energy use areas like oil and gas and wind energy, these areas. We merged all of the spatial extents of the constraint layers, there are about 40 layers in total, and we created one potential constraints layer that was then evaluated with the wave and tidal resource data. So in the interest of time, I'm just going to show one example result. This is sea space considerations for wave energy in Central California. Again, we looked at the 3 regions, looked at wave and tidal energy. Now, if we analyze the Central California wave energy resource in terms of distance to shore and water depth, which is kind of a useful exercise for developers and regulators, but we see that in this region, the highest band of wave power, which is in yellow, is located between 15 and 35 kilometers from shore in 60 to 120 meters of water. The next highest wave power band is shown in orange. Here, the wave water depths are between 50 and 150 meters, and this is between 5 and 30 kilometers from shore. So this seems pretty feasible. However, if we look at this table down here, this is now evaluated with our spatial constraint map. We see that almost 95% of the energy resource that falls into the highest wave band are located in areas that overlap with other marine uses. So again, we did this kind of opposite. This is 95% of the point count is in constrained areas. So of course, as you know, this doesn't preclude marine energy development, but it does indicate that there are some challenges to overcome and consideration of the interactions with other marine uses. So overall, our findings for the SB 605 Phase 2 report are summarized here. Basically, we found that the potential for tidal energy in California is limited to just San Francisco Bay and some other smaller bays where there are some constrictions in flow. Wave energy is highest in the north. Unfortunately, that's away from the most populated areas of the state. And then, as you're already aware, wave and tidal energy applications will require more consideration than this. There's going to be device-specific modeling and evaluation, and then extensive environmental permitting. All right, so we've covered toxic tidbits and tides. All we have left is turbines. In this case, I'm going to talk about wind turbines. We're funded by the California Energy Commission, CEC, to develop an integrated, real-time, multi-scale system for monitoring bird and bat interactions with offshore wind technologies. We created a 3-minute video that summarizes our project. I think it's pretty cool and it gives me a chance to actually drink some water and take a rest from speaking, so I'm just going to show the video. To meet its clean energy goals, California aims to generate up to 25 gigawatts of offshore wind power by 2045, enough to power 25 million homes. One critical challenge of offshore wind energy development is ensuring the protection of birds and bats that may be susceptible to collision with turbines. To address this wildlife risk, the California Energy Commission Electric Program Investment Charge, or CEC EPIC, is supporting integral consulting in developing a near real-time system of technologies to inform and improve bird and bat collision risk forecasting, which must be understood over multiple scales. Macroscale avoidance is flying around or over an entire wind farm. Mesoscale is avoidance of an individual turbine. And microscale avoidance is maneuvering around a turbine blade. Integral system of technologies consists of radars that are capable of near real-time macro to mesoscale monitoring of bird and bat density and movement patterns in 3 dimensions. Our radars are integrated with a mesoscale thermal imaging system, which applies specialized stereo image processing methods to detect and track birds and bats in 3 dimensions. The animal's body shape and size and flight characteristics facilitate identification. The integrated radar and imaging system has been tested and validated using drones, and results provide confidence that these technologies will fill knowledge gaps in macro and mesoscale flight behavior in and around offshore wind energy projects. For microscale avoidance assessments, the project team tested blade-mounted impact detectors using projectiles launched at wind turbine blades at the Sandia Scaled Wind Farm Test Facility, or SWIFT. The results of SWIFT tests inform numerical models that accurately simulate the response of turbine blades to impact. The models will help determine the best places for blade-mounted impact sensors to detect bird and bat strikes and how well they are expected to perform under a variety of conditions. The combination of macroscale radar, mesoscale imaging, and microscale blade impact sensing will enable comprehensive monitoring and assessments of bird and bat interactions with offshore wind energy projects. Thanks to the CEC EPIC program and project partners, Integral is advancing technologies to increase understanding of bird and bat behavior to better inform and mitigate risks to wildlife. All right, so as indicated there, Sandia did, their creative services team pulled together that video for us. So we've covered now turbines, tides, and toxic tidbits. And I kind of want to pull it all together with a short presentation on science communication. This project, which was called Empowering Communities to Participate in Marine Energy Planning and Development, was supported by a DOE Small Business Innovation Research, or SBIR, funding program. This was a phase 1 SBIR. We were focused on proof of concept development activities. Upon completion of phase 1, Integral's business classification changed from small to large. So we were unfortunately not able to even apply for phase 2. If you guys know of any opportunities, we are eager to continue with this work. And I think a lot of the PMEC community really resonates with this type of work as well. So as you all know, the ocean is crowded. Just talked about sea space considerations in the previous lightning talk. Effective marine spatial planning is needed to preemptively deconflict marine renewable energy development. The planning process should be collaborative. It should include all stakeholders for responsible and sustainable use of marine resources. Unfortunately, more often than not, community members are left out of decision making until well into the planning process. So just to address this issue, we developed Sea Stories. Sea Stories is a user-friendly data dashboard that supports ocean multi-use management. Our goal is to empower communities with information that is delivered in an engaging and easy-to-use manner. We want to promote meaningful stakeholder engagement and communications and informed decision-maker. So the Sea Stories concept is aimed at challenging Brandolini's law, stated here. It says the amount of energy needed to refute BS is an order of magnitude larger than that needed to produce it. Now, as we all know, BS in the news is prevalent, particularly starting 5 to 8 years ago and now more than ever. So our project involved community outreach through both internet surveys and in-person community workshops. We were coordinating the workshops and the surveys with some trusted community nonprofit organizations. We focused on Northern and Central California regions. Through this outreach, we learned that community members don't know much about marine renewable energy, but they're really eager to learn. When we pointed out that there's various educational resources available online, really easily accessible, like in Tethys, almost everyone said, oh, gosh, that's too much information. It's complicated. I don't even want to go there. People are really intimidated by science, and they flat out came out and said it. They just want an easy button. So in response, we developed the pilot proof of concept Sea Stories data dashboard for marine renewable energy. We implemented an AI chatbot to serve as that easy button. This was several years ago when AI chatbots were cool and new. Now they're kind of everywhere, but we thought it was neat. This one, fine-tuned to marine renewable energy. We designed infographics that are interactive and informative. They pull together all that existing information into one spot. We didn't want to reinvent the wheel. We didn't want to, just redo everything, that all the efforts that PNNL and others have put into a resource like Tethys, but we wanted to put it all together into one story. So in this example, we're showing a floating offshore wind turbine and farm, really the whole system. So it enables the user to click on something like the inter-array cable and learn about that and its potential interactions with whales. You can click on the sounds. It goes to discovery of sound in the sea, where you can hear the whale sounds. You can hear turbine sounds that have been recorded underwater in the past, or sounds of commercial ships. You can click on the wind turbine and learn about how large these things are, where they've been deployed. You can click on the substation and learn what is a substation, what does it do, and how is this whole wind farm going to be configured once once they're out there in existence. We also created a news feed. Again, news feeds aren't new. I do want to point out on this because we did take a BART out of the news feed. This is an older screenshot. But we created a news feed that supports annotations. So this is a system that is more engaging for community members. I can log in with any Google address. You can highlight and make a comment. on anything on this page. You don't have to see that. Once it's closed, it just highlights and says, hey, there's an annotation here. If you don't care about, reading your news and someone's blog at the same time, you don't have to click on it. But if you're interested, if you want to engage with someone, you can simply click on that highlight and respond. So the key takeaways from our pilot Sea Stories project were that the marine renewable energy planning process must start early. All stakeholders need to be at the table, including community members, and this is not new. We learned that community members, they trust scientists. It's good for us. They highly distrust developers, period. So if you're a developer, it's important to have the back of trusted community organizations who can help communicate on your behalf and help instill that trust into those community members. The present day public planning processes like comment periods for environmental impact assessments or even town halls in your local communities, they're intimidating and they're oftentimes inconvenient. So there really needs to be another mechanism or mechanisms in place to help transfer information and communicate across stakeholders. So that was kind of the idea behind Sea Stories, is to act as that additional mechanism. All right, so before I take questions, here's just a slide. It provides some more information on some of the projects that I presented on. The leftmost QR code is a link to our Pearl Harbor publication. This was in Case Studies in Chemical and Environmental Engineering from 2024. Second from the left is the link to our European Wave and Tidal Energy Conference Proceedings paper on Sea Stories. Next to that link is it's an offshore technology conference summary paper on the CEC Seabird project. It doesn't present any results, just kind of an overview. And then on the right are 2 links to the SB 605 Phase 1 and Phase 2 consultant reports. The recordings of the associated workshops are also available on the CEC website. I don't think they're on these 2 links, but navigate around and you'll find them. So I'll leave this up for a few more seconds. And I think this will be recorded too, so you can always go up to the PMAC YouTube channel. That's it. Thank you very much. I'll be happy to take any questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Grace. That was I loved some of the videos in there as well. I wanted to open the floor for questions either through chat, or you can just unmute yourself. And also wanted to say, let's take the first question from a student or early career. If they're, let me monitor the chat there. Well, if you don't want to jump in, any students, then we can open it up to anyone for questions and discussion. Oh, and this reminds me, I'm going to stop recording now, so you will not be on our YouTube channel for this part of it.